Our guest today is the Superintendent of the Chicago Police Department. He has served as Superintendent just over 3 years. Our guest today began his career in law enforcement with the New York City Police Department 23 years ago. 23, that's what your bio says, is that right?
It's fine.
Okay, okay, all right. He was raised, now you see why he says this. He was raised in the Bronx, New York, by his father.
Parochial school, I can count, Jay.
Yeah, parochial school, he can count to 10. By his father, a World War II Marine, and his mother, a nurse. Ladies and gentlemen, Superintendent Garry McCarthy. Garry. All right, have fun up here.
I'm immediately nervous. Consul General of France is here. I'm worried about an international incident based on something that I could say. But Consul General, don't worry. I don't understand the Chicago accent either. It's something you get used to. They are talking about us. Don't worry about it. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and I'm really pleased to be here. As I like to point out, I'm pleased to be anywhere right now. You may have heard I had a heart attack some while ago. Actually, it's about 10 weeks now. And I just got to share with you the love that I got from my friends across Chicago and across the country was overwhelming. But my favorite comment came from my friend Charlie Beck, who's the chief of police in Los Angeles, California. Really big guy in the law enforcement community. And, you know, the joke that everybody liked to pass around was, you know, at least we know now that McCarthy really does have a heart, or, you know, how could he have a heart attack? He doesn't have a heart. So Charlie and I were having that discussion, and I said, Charlie, look, I have pictures of the heart. I have a certification from a doctor. I have a heart. And he said, without missing a beat, he says, yeah, that's great. We got a piano in my house, but nobody plays it. You gotta love it. You just gotta love it. Before I get started, I wanna introduce some of our staff who's here. These are the men who actually make it happen. First Deputy Superintendent Al Weisinger is here. Now I have to look around because they're spread out. I got Jim Russell, as my Chief of Staff, is here. Next to him is Wayne Gulliford, Chief of Patrol. Next to him is John Escalante, Chief of Detectives. We've got Nick Rohde is here, Chief of Organized Crime. And we should have Juan Rivera here. Juan, where are you, Juan? Juan Rivera. Oh, he's probably... Okay, Juan's just watching us. He's internal affairs. You got to be able to shift on the fly, ladies and gentlemen. Well, anyway, I just want to acknowledge that you know, these individuals really have done a phenomenal job. It's almost 3.5 years that I've been here. Sometimes it seems like I can't believe it's only been that long, and other times I think that it's been the blink of an eye. So I've had some of the longest days, and looking back, I can't believe it. I first came here and addressed this audience in December of 2011. And what I did at that time was I kind of laid out the vision, the shared vision that myself and Mayor Emanuel have for the role of the Chicago Police Department, and the plan for implementation of what that shared vision was. And just to break it down really simply, it revolves around a very simple concept, which is we can do community policing while reducing crime at the same time. Which, you know, in some circles in policing, they're kind of, you could do one or you can't do the other, right? We can make people feel good, or we can reduce crime. And in some places, they really believe that they can't do both. But at the end of the day, this was the plan that we came here with, was to be able to reduce crime while at the same time working with the community. And one of my major goals was to not only do that, but to institutionalize that change. One of my frustrations that I always point out is we had a lot of success in Newark. in Newark, New Jersey, when I was there for 5+ years. And I jokingly say that by the time my plane landed at O'Hare, Newark was back to October of 2006 before I got there. The cultural change and the institutional change never really took place. And it's very frustrating. And I came up through the NYPD, as Jay points out, 23 years ago. And I had the opportunity to be an upper mid-level manager when Bill Bratton came to town the first time, right? And kind of changed policing in that from being reactive to being proactive. Instead of showing up at a crime scene after something happens, to now tracking crime and figuring out ways to prevent the next crime from occurring. And I saw the institutional change that Bill Bratton was able to bring to the largest police department in the country, which in some cases was a very difficult institution to crack. But that change today, when Bill Bratton returned 20 years after he left, I don't understand it, trust me. But at the end of the day, I'm sure that the department that Bill Bratton walked back into was very, very similar to the department that he left with the institutional changes that he had implemented. And what are the methods that we use now that have really changed policing? It's really business management, which is a shift in management philosophy of policing. We used to be these hierarchical structures, top-down paramilitary organizations. You're going to do as I say, you're not going to question it, to really business management and making sure that people understand some of the deeper thought processes that we're using to reduce crime. And with that, one of the favorite things that I like to put together is when I have conversations with business leaders and they ask me, what is it that you're doing? And I tell them, well, we're putting the right people in the right places. We're giving them the authority and we're pushing down the authority and accountability. We're giving them the resources. We're holding them accountable for what's happening. And they say to me, you know what, that's the same thing I'm doing. And I'm like, yes, it's all really the same concept right now. We're giving the resources now. The focus of the department has shifted. It's really tilted to the district commands. And this is kind of a big change in philosophy because when we got here, I like to say that the Chicago Police Department really had 3 separate departments. We had the I Did Enforcement Police, which were these big citywide task forces. We had beat officers who were busy running from job to job because those task forces were drawn, the personnel were drawn from within the districts, so the beat officers really didn't have time to do any affirmative police work except to run from job to job. And then we had the I Make People Feel Good Police, which was the community policing aspect of the Chicago Police Department. At this point, we've disbanded those task forces. We've put those officers into the districts. We've given the leadership, the district commanders, the authority and the accountability to make decisions. And at the end of the day, it's working very well. We flattened the structure in business management practices. You know, one of my favorite things is when I came in and I looked at the table of organization of the Chicago Police Department, and I likened it to the periodic chart that we all studied in high school chemistry, right? You know, and I looked at the fact that we had assistant superintendents and deputy superintendents. And I always knew that there was something going on when I got the response to a question. When I would ask the question, what is this that a deputy superintendent does? And the response was, well, back in 1963, Old Man Daley wanted to promote so-and-so, but so-and-so couldn't work with so-and-so, so we had to create a spot where they could both be deputy superintendents and never the two shall intersect. Politics, right? And at the end of the day, we flattened out the structure. We eliminated some of those positions. We consolidated districts. We consolidated 6 districts into 3. Using business management metrics, looking at the populations, looking at calls for service, looking at land mass, looking at violent crime, and looking at the number of officers in each district. It didn't really make sense the way that we were structured. We collapsed some areas. When I got here, we had 5 areas across the city. Now we have 3, north, central, and south. Go figure, right? Real complicated. And at the end of the day, one of the most significant things we did was we created a career path for executives. And there's something that is likened to a rite of passage of going through district command. So we're putting all the emphasis on the district commanders. If you want to move ahead in this job, now you have to be a district commander. And with that comes the authority and the accountability that I was talking about. So what I'm talking about is creating a performance-based department, not a political one. And I've really got to tell you something, that this is something that the mayor demanded, but at the same time, he had to really walk the walk to make this happen. Because previously, you all know that we may have been a little bit more political than we are today. We implemented, you know what? I love the giggles when I say things like that. Here's one that people will probably giggle about. The whole issue of legitimacy goes along with that. You know, we have to have internal legitimacy if we're going to treat people fairly. And we use this concept called procedural justice and police legitimacy as cornerstones of what we're doing. And police legitimacy and procedural justice really revolves around the issue of how you treat people sometimes is more important than what you are actually doing, because it has to do with the perception that the individuals will have, and a bad encounter will be a lifelong lasting event in somebody's mind, as will a good encounter. It also has a lot to do with the historic divide between police departments and communities of color. There's an issue of race that runs throughout law enforcement in this country. We see it constantly today. The way to overcome it that we're using in the Chicago Police Department is not to use the methods that we used to use, which were these large task forces that would invade a community, maybe tamp down crime for a couple of days, and then leave. The term geographical accountability is the single biggest change in the Chicago Police Department. Everybody has a piece of turf that they're accountable for. And the expectation is, with the same officer on the same beat every single day, that officer is going to get to know the good kids from the bad kids, because they may look the same, but at the same time, you could tell the difference between the 5 kids who are always standing on that corner and the 5 kids who are coming from basketball practice standing on that corner. We were not structured to deliver community policing. By breaking down those task forces, distributing the individuals into the patrol districts, by finding the best and the brightest to run those patrol districts, by creating a real meritocracy where you move ahead and there's a rite of passage with the most difficult job that we have in the police department, we're creating the internal legitimacy. With that, we also created the most significant training course in procedural justice and police legitimacy in the country. People are coming from across the country, and every police officer in the Chicago Police Department, from me to patrolmen, will all go through this training course that has to do with how you treat people. It was actually designed by somebody named Tracy Mears, that some of you may know, and Tom Tyler, who are the 2 greatest advocates and really creators of these 2 concepts. So that was the vision that we had, and the method that we were going to put it in play that we brought with us was this CompStat system, which you may or may not have heard about. It's a business management mechanism to look at where crime is happening, react to it, have strategies to address it, then track crime in and out. How are we doing? Are we doing better, or are we doing worse? And the second thing that we brought with us that goes along with it is this concept of fixing broken windows. Now, Jay mentioned that my dad was a World War II Marine. He was also a drill instructor for some time. It was not easy growing up McCarthy, let's put it that way. But I can tell you this, I learned at a very early age that taking care of the little things will help prevent the big things. And an example that we could use that's really simple that everybody understands is if we ignore people standing on a corner drinking alcohol, eventually one of those people will assault another person with one of those alcohol bottles once it's empty. Of course, they wouldn't waste the alcohol otherwise. We also brought with us some other alternative type policing strategies, like the violence reduction strategy, which is something that David Kennedy really created in Boston in 1996 that has to do with doing gang call-ins and giving them a message, giving them 3 messages. The first one has to do with law enforcement. We tell them if this concept of group accountability is now the law of the land. If one of the individuals in your gangs kills somebody, we're going to hold the whole gang accountable for that. We'll take the gang out as best we can. We'll get you for tax evasion. We'll get you for welfare fraud. We'll get you for dealing narcotics. We'll get you for carrying guns. And then, once we take them out, we bring them all back in and we say, look, somebody didn't listen to the message. It's called lather, rinse, and repeat, right? That's how we do it. But at these call-ins, they also get the voice of the community. And this is really different. We generally get the parent of a murdered child to come in and describe to these kids what they're doing to the fabric of the community. And it's really fascinating when some of these folks are really, really articulate. And I've actually seen these kids break down and cry during these call-ins, these hardcore gangbangers. And then the last message is an offering of help, social services, because most of the time they will tell us, look, I'm only in this game because I can't get a job. And I can't get a job because I don't have a GED. And we'll help them get GEDs, we'll help them get jobs and things of that nature through some of our partners with an offering of social services. And I told you all in December of 2011 that our goal was to create the most efficient and effective police department in the country, setting the national standard for policing. Well, I've got to tell you something. We've made enormous strides in that direction. I also talked a little bit about crime reduction and community policing, how they're not mutually exclusive terms. And I also already described to you how we had to reorganize the department for the proper delivery of those services. And I came back 17 months later, in May of 2013, I came back again and spoke to you. I don't think I've ever been to any one club invited back 3 times, Jay. Thank you so much. Usually after the first or second time, they had enough. But what I described at that point was the implementation of that vision and the detailed changes and results to date that we had made at that time. And I spoke entirely too long. So I'm going to recap that, and I'm going to do it quickly. So forgive me if you're not familiar with some of these things. I apologize. But I want you to really get a sense of the sea change in the way that we do police work and the things that we've implemented here. You know, one of my favorite sayings came from my friend Bill Blair, who just retired as chief of police in Toronto. He said, there's 2 things people don't like: the way things are and change. And change comes hard sometimes, and especially when you're dealing with a traditional culture like a policing agency. But I've got to tell you, and I'm giving the credit to the leadership that's here. I'm sorry, Bob Tracy. He talks funny too. He came from the Bronx also. Bob Tracy is the chief of crime control strategies, who I brought with me actually from New York. He's a former New York City police captain. And Bob came in. The first thing that we did was we created the Office of Chief of Crime Control Strategies. One individual who is solely focused on what it is we can do to reduce crime, come up with strategies to implement it, tactics to make it work, help identify the individuals who are the most talented that we can move ahead in a career path and start institutionalizing some of those changes. One of the most important things that we did, along with some of those other changes in a table of organization that I've already pointed out. The issue of geographical accountability was implemented across the board. It wasn't just for beat officers. It's not that you just have the same 2 officers every day in the same beat, but we eliminated those task forces. Our detectives now have geographical integrity. They are accountable for crime fighting in certain areas. Our narcotics teams now have geographical integrity. Our focus in narcotics has shifted. Instead of just following a case where it may go, because a case could start on 35th in Michigan and end up in Evanston, right? And if we arrest people in Evanston with a whole bunch of kilos, it doesn't do a whole heck of a lot to reduce crime and violence at 35th in Michigan. So at the end of the day, implementing geographical accountability across the board, including some discretionary resources that we kept at the area level, which is the area above the districts, area level geographical integrity as far as task forces, teams to back up in case we have a flare-up in any one particular district. We retooled the detective division in the way that they do business. We again consolidated them. They had 5 areas. We consolidated them into 3. We created homicide investigation teams. Just teams, in other words, not individuals. Previously, a detective or 2 detectives would investigate a homicide. Now what happens is there's 8, 10, how many on the teams, John? 8 to 10 detectives who are all intimately involved in that homicide investigation. So when one guy or gal is off, somebody else is picking up the slack and running with the case the whole time. We moved our property crime investigators out into the districts rather than being in a separate command. They're now working hand in hand with district officers to solve property crimes like burglaries and larcenies and robberies in the actual districts. We strengthened our internal affairs division. We gave them geographical accountability. Just like we investigate crime, when we're investigating allegations against officers, it's going to be the same population that you hear about all the time. And having geographical accountability is important for internal affairs also. Put more investigators, we put more supervision into internal affairs, and we gave internal affairs priority in selecting supervisors to go into investigative components. So let me just give you an example. You're a detective and you're a crackerjack detective for 5, 10 years, and you end up on a homicide investigation team. Now you get promoted to sergeant. You want to go back and do some investigations. Internal affairs will have the first crack to say, you know what, crackerjack detective, you're going to come here and work in internal affairs. Because the priority of our integrity cannot be overstated. Our integrity and our legitimacy is the single most important thing that we need. We increased training. We created another training cycle. As I told you, we created this training in police legitimacy. And what I need to point out is that all of this was done with the goal of creating the proper method of delivery of the services. I'm speaking in business management terms, which is different in the world of policing than years ago. Now I'm going to talk cop stuff. We're going to talk about crime reduction. What is it that we did? You know, previously, and I've said this a lot, I think that crime strategy across the country, but certainly here in the city of Chicago, had to do with putting cops on dots. It had to do with deployment. Well, it's a lot bigger than that. Crime reduction is about the people, places, and things that cause crime. And we've gone out into all of those places. So we've got a different method of narcotics enforcement, which is focused on eliminating individual narcotics markets. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Law enforcement will never fix the narcotics problem in this country, nor do I think we should try. But what we can do is we can use narcotics enforcement to reduce crime and improve quality of life for the citizens of the city of Chicago that we serve. And that is the focus. I'm not trying to fix the narcotics problem in this country. Intelligent application of enforcement will help us reduce crime and violence in those neighborhoods. We also created something called the West Side Narcotics Initiative. Now that's done because many of you know that on the West Side, narcotics is probably the single greatest driver of violence in that area of the city, and it's actually different than on the South Side. In layman's terms, on the South Side, it's more about gangbanging. On the West Side, the gangs are all involved in the narcotics trade. So we have to do something different. We did a different initiative. We're doing a different initiative on the West Side. The single most important strategy that we actually developed was our gang violence reduction strategy. And it dawned on me very quickly when I got to Chicago that while we had one of the worst gang violence problems in the country, we did not have a comprehensive gang violence reduction strategy that reached across all levels of the department and brought all resources to focus on reducing gang violence. So what does that mean? In the CompStat world, there's 4 tenets, 4 cornerstones of CompStat. And the first one is timely, accurate intelligence. You have to first know who the criminals are, right? You have to know where the crime is happening, and you have to know how it's happening. Well, with that in mind, what we did was we went out and we audited all the gangs in the city. We sat around tables with maps in each district in the city. We outlined areas that the gangs called their own, their turfs. We outlined all the gangs. We outlined the membership of those gangs, and we outlined the gang conflicts. And the reason why this is so critical, and then we put it into the hands of the beat officers, the reason why it's so critical is because we would have a shooting with gang member A here, right? And everybody would run to the scene because that's what we do, right? Cops run to the scene of the shooting. Well, then gang member B would get shot over here. So what would we do? We'd run over here. And then gang member A's gang would get shot over here, and then B, and A and B, and back and forth. Well, how do you get ahead of that? There's a saying in baseball, you've got to know what you're going to do with the ball before it gets hit to you. Well, if gang member A gets shot here, we already know that he's in conflict with gang B over here. So we don't deploy all our resources to where the shooting happened. We deploy it to where we expect a retaliation. And when we pick up members of gang A in gang B's territory with guns after a shooting, we've stopped a gang shooting. This is probably the single most important thing as far as crime strategy that we've done here. People are coming from across the country to learn what it is that we're doing. They're actually coming from across the world at this point to see what it is that we're doing as far as this strategy is concerned. Within that, I mentioned already to get the violence reduction strategy is another component. That violence reduction strategy that I mentioned with the gang call-ins, we've now taken right to the homes of the gang members. We've developed something called a custom notification program, where instead of calling in a group of gang members and putting them in the same room and having that conversation, the district commander, along with some folks from the community and a social service provider, actually go and knock on the gang leader's door and sit down in their house with their families, sometimes their mothers, their grandparents, sometimes their wives and their children. The people who are going to influence the change in behavior of that individual, and they sit down and describe to them the fact that they are 10 times, 15 times, 100 times more likely to become a victim of gun violence, and what it is that we can do to help you get out of that life and prevent you from becoming a victim of gun violence. And just an example of it, in the 10th District, one of the best examples I could give you was Maria Pena, the commander in the 10th District, did one of these call-ins and had this hardcore gangbanger sitting there with his 6-month-old daughter sitting on his lap. And she was describing to this individual, you know, you're going to get shot. You're going to die if you keep this lifestyle up. And the impact that that had on that individual, knock on wood, he hasn't been a victim yet. And to my knowledge, what's happening with him is that he hasn't been arrested since we did that. But at the end of the day, we're finding enormous results with this, enormous results. It's alternative strategies to reducing crime besides the things that we normally do, like Operation Impact, which is a saturation deployment strategy. We were able to sit down, look at the geography of Chicago, and we were able to do a 3-year analysis regarding shootings, murders, and robberies. And what we found is 3% of the geography of Chicago was accountable for 20% of our shootings, robberies, and murders. So it's not that deep, folks. What do? We put officers there, right? And we saturate those neighborhoods. We've done it in 20 zones across the city. And at the same time, what has happened is those zones have doubled the normal reduction in crime that we're having across the city. We've got something else called 2 degrees of association that we use. It's a rather complicated formula created by a friend of ours named Andrew Papachristos, who actually was with the University of Chicago. He's smart enough that he's at Yale now. I didn't mean that in a bad way towards Chicago. Hey, look, I went to Albany State University, all right? That's what I'm talking about. That has nothing to do with anybody else. I'm just saying he's a smart guy. He can use things like algorithms. You know, I can't do that. But we do have folks who take the formula that was created by Andrew and applying algorithms are now able to identify the people who are 80 to 100 to 800 times more likely to be victims or offenders of gun violence. And we deal with them on a couple of levels. We deal with them with the custom notification program. We also watch to see if they have warrants, right? We just go and lock them up. That keeps them from getting killed on the street or killing somebody else. Or if they're involved in a narcotics trade, Nick Rohde and his guys go after them. So that's what we're doing as far as crime strategy is concerned, but it's more than just policing. Crime reduction is about relationships and partnerships with the community. We created something called the Superintendent's Advisory Council, which is a group of civic leaders from across the city, and we get together when something important happens and I have to get some messages out and listen to the community back and forth. And these are also folks who bring those messages back out into the community for us. As you know, the mayor is having closed-door forums with federal law enforcement agencies, faith-based groups, and community organizations to talk about what we can do to improve relations and reduce crime here in Chicago. And we recreated the Citizens Police Academy, which is a 9-week course that civilians go through to garner a better understanding of how we're trained and what it is that we're doing. And we're creating more and better dialogues across the city as a result. And I've got to tell you that the mayor's initiatives that back up our crime strategy is really at the cornerstone of what we're doing. You know, one of the sayings, Jack Maple, who is really the godfather of crime reduction, he's the crazy genius that Bill Bratton brought in and created CompStat. He was a mean person, mean-spirited. He definitely ripped wings off of flies when he was a kid. He created CompStat, and I was a victim of his CompStats. I'm okay now. I've had some counseling. But Jack used to say that nobody's ever fixed crime. And our goal here is not just to reduce crime, it's to fix the conditions that surround it. And I could give you an example of that. You know, Operation Impact, we started 20 zones in the city. And we took one of the zones on the northwest side, zone number 20, which was really the lowest crime of those high crime 20 areas, if you will. And what we did was we made a significant community investment in it after about a year of Operation Impact being out there and having it saturated with officers. What we did was we formed that community. We took the community organizations there, we brought them together, we put them in forums, we said, okay, what can we do to help you support what we're doing? Because we're not an occupying army and we can't stay here forever. And what they did was they gave us lists of things that needed to be done. And we brought in city services, and we cleaned up these various areas. We've painted over graffiti, right? We fixed streetlights. We did all of those little nicey nice things that help inspire civic pride in a community. And then we backed out. And knock on wood, we did that about 3 months ago, Bob? Wayne, about 3 months ago? More than that? 6 months ago? It's working. We're getting better results than when we had all of those police officers saturating that neighborhood. It's a great social experiment. It's about fixing what's going on, turning it over to the community, and working with them to maintain it. You guys having a good time over there, Bobby? They're playing, they're laughing at me. So here's what we did. And this kind of ends my review of what we've done so far, and I'm going to start giving you results. But we changed the internal workings of the department. This is all business management. We did it for the better delivery of services. We implemented better methodologies to do that. And now we measure inputs and outputs, and we adjust as necessary. So a couple of weeks ago, I was working out at East Bank Club, and you know what? How many people here go to East Bank Club? Guys, put on a towel, please. Especially when you want to talk to me, please. All right? In East Bank Club, a guy stops me a couple of weeks ago and he says, you know, I've been here for 50 years, and I've never seen it like this. I looked at him, I said, what is it that you mean? He says, well, you've got the toughest job in the city. He says, this is just out of control. I said, you know, you're right on one thing. I said, you've been here 50 years and you've never seen it like this because you have to go back more than 50 years to see the same crime results that we're getting here in the city of Chicago today, based on what we've already done. So what are the results based on those changes that we've made in the department? Now, I hope we have this timed properly. If it's not timed properly, I'm going to blame Marty, my public information guy. Last year, every major crime category saw declines from 2012 and 2011. We had the fewest robberies, burglaries, motor vehicle thefts, and arsons in recorded history in the city of Chicago. Felony thefts were at the lowest level since 1972. Criminal sexual assault and aggravated battery and assaults were at the lowest level since 1982. The progress is happening citywide. Yeah, you know, those of you who aren't into statistics, just roll your eyes right now because you're going to get a lot of it. I apologize. And we're doing this for a reason, because it's not about one thing that's happening, it's about everything that's happening. The progress is happening citywide. In 2013, every police district in the city saw between an 8 and 24% reduction in crime. And what's fascinating about that is that it's happening on the south side, it's happening on the west side, and it's happening still in some of our best neighborhoods. The district that I love to talk about that led the city in crime reduction last year was the 20th district in Edgewater. Now, that's one of the lowest crime neighborhoods in the city to begin with. Reducing numbers that are so low to have the largest percentage reduction in the city is overwhelming. Last year, 18 of our 22 police districts saw declines in murder or remained flat, and the most significant drops came on the south side. That's where the violent crime is happening. That's where we're seeing our greatest results. We've got a number of charts for you here now. We're going to talk about 2014. Through the first 8 months of the year, murders are down 54% from 20 years ago. They're down 37% from 10 years ago, and they're down 8% from last year. Now, last year, I'm sure most of you heard that we had the lowest murder rate in the city going back to the 60s and the 70s. As I stand here right now, we have 26 less murders than we had last year. 26, going into not even the fourth quarter yet. The first 8 months witnessed the fewest murders in this city since 1963. Criminal sexual assaults are also on the decline. They're down 64% from 20 years ago, and they're down 9% from last year. Robberies are down 73% from 20 years ago and down 20% from last year. Burglaries are down 69% from 20 years ago and 21% from last year. Motor vehicle thefts are down 76% from 20 years ago. Anybody here in the insurance industry? Yeah, I didn't think you'd raise your hand. We should talk about why our insurance rates are so high, shouldn't we? And they're down 20% from last year. These aren't just statistics, ladies and gentlemen. These are people. We have to look at whether or not we're making progress. And you have to go back decades to find a time in Chicago when crime was this low. At the end of September, and I don't know if everybody realizes this, but the actual murder reduction in the city under my watch, in other words, during the time frame that the mayor and I have been here, actually started in the fourth quarter of 2012. But it was missed because we had a bad early part of the year, and we ended the year with a high number, about 500 murders. And at the end of September, we will have accomplished 8 consecutive quarters, in other words, 2 consecutive years of significant murder reduction in the city of Chicago. So we're having a lot of success. Things are moving in the right direction. But there's a lot of work to be done. One murder, one shooting is way too many. And at the end of the day, there's lots of things that we can do to address it. And I'm going to tell you something that I say frequently, and I apologize if it offends somebody. But the criminal justice system in the state of Illinois is not designed to reduce gun violence. I'm going to say that again. It's not designed to reduce gun violence. Because if it was designed to reduce gun violence, we wouldn't have an issue that we have, which is the proliferation of firearms in this city. Now, I jokingly talk about, people always ask me the difference between New York and Chicago. And I jokingly talk about pizza. And I talk about the Yankees. But at the end of the day, the proliferation of firearms in this city is the single most important difference between New York and Chicago. Last year, we recovered 7 guns for every 1 gun that the New York City Police Department recovered. These guys are great officers, these men and women, but we're not 7 times better than those cops in New York. The simple fact is, the lax gun laws in the state of Illinois and our proximity to Wisconsin and Indiana has it that the illegal flow of firearms into this city is overwhelming. And there's 5 things that New York City has, that New York State has, that Illinois does not have. And these 5 things will have a profound impact on what happens in the city of Chicago. First of all, let me tell you that we do not have the strictest gun laws in the country. It's urban legend, just like we are not the murder capital of the country. In New York State, there's an assault weapons ban. Assault weapons were created to kill people in combat, just like hand grenades, howitzers, bazookas. I don't hear the discussion as to why you can't buy a hand grenade over the counter at Walmart when people are talking about the Second Amendment. It certainly is an arm, isn't it? Well, why is it different? Oh, I want to take my AK-47 squirrel hunting. Make it a fair fight. Give the squirrel a hand grenade. Extended magazines. The hit potential for any shootout in this country is 3 out of 10. So if you put a 30-round magazine in an AK-47 with a deadlier bullet, you're going to hit the person 9 times, and it's more likely they're going to die from each one of those bullets than a 22 or a 32 or a smaller bullet. And by the way, there's drums now that carry up to 100 bullets, maybe even more. A requirement to report the loss, theft, and transfer of a firearm. That's what New York has. When concealed carry came to Illinois, they created a requirement to report the loss and theft of a firearm, which didn't exist before. But think about this. If you sell your car to somebody, you've got to report that transfer to the state. But right now, you walk into any gun store in the state of Illinois with an FOID card, and you buy as many guns as you want, you walk out the door with no accountability as what you do with that firearm. Those are the guns that end up on the streets of Chicago. That can be fixed. The India Martin case is the most clearest example of that. If you don't remember, India Martin is one of those high-profile murders that we had in Chicago. She was the 14-year-old girl who was killed by a 14-year-old girl who brought a gun to a fist fight. That gun was bought by somebody with an FOID card. It was transferred illegally to a criminal and ended up in India Martin's hands. It crossed about 6 persons' hands before it touched her. There was 6 opportunities to stop that murder from happening. Did I say India? I'm sorry, India was the victim. It ended up in the offender's hands. It shouldn't have happened. And with the requirement to report the transfer of a firearm, that straw purchasing would stop. Universal background checks. Boy, this is a tough one, huh? To keep guns out of the hands of criminals, insane people, or people who are somehow mentally challenged, or terrorists. That was blocked on the Senate floor, folks. What is going on here? And well, forget it. I don't want to cause an incident. I'll move on. And the last one is something that's difficult. Significant jail time for offenders who possess illegal firearms. At the end of the day, what we've got here in Chicago is too many guns coming in and not enough punishment going out. We see it time and again. The people who we arrest with firearms are back on the street immediately because possession of an illegal loaded firearm is not even considered a violent crime for sentencing purposes in the state of Illinois. That's outrageous. The best example I could give you is the murder of Hydea Pendleton, Everybody knows about Hydea Pendleton. I don't have to remind you about her. She's the girl who was at the president's swearing in. The alleged shooter of Hydea Pendleton was arrested for illegal possession of a loaded firearm in November of 2011 and shot, in November of 2012, pled guilty to illegal possession of a loaded firearm and shot and killed Hydea Pendleton in January of 2013. He didn't go to jail. People have to go to jail for illegal possession of a firearm. And the problem is, there's an element of race that's involved here. People get very uncomfortable when we talk about this. But at the end of the day, I don't know if you know this. Remember how I said the criminal justice system is not designed to reduce gun violence? Last year in Cook County, and I'm sure Kim will endorse this, 26% of the individuals in Cook County Jail were in for narcotics-related possession, narcotics-related offenses. Only 3.8% were in for gun possession. So if the criminal justice system is designed to put people in jail for narcotics possession, we're doing a really good job. But if the system were designed to prevent people from getting shot, those numbers would tip, now wouldn't they? And this is why we need help in Springfield. We have to have some reasonability in the gun laws. We can protect the Second Amendment while at the same time letting people, preventing those illegal firearms from getting into the hands of criminals. It's about systems management, ladies and gentlemen. Systems management are the methods by which we run and manage our police departments today, just like businesses. But the system needs help from other places because it's called the criminal justice system. And at the end of the day, there's things that we could do to move it forward. We're going to keep moving this forward. We're going to keep moving the ball. We're going to find better ways to do it, but we're going to reach diminishing returns because any businessman here or woman will tell you that at the end of the day, if you always do the same thing, eventually it starts to peter out and you have to change something to make it work better. This is something that we could do immediately. Jobs, poverty, lack of education are certainly cornerstones of what helps cause crime, but it's going to take decades to fix that. We could do something about gun laws very simply with a conversation. New York repealed something called the Rockefeller drug laws. And the Rockefeller drug laws were these really stringent guidelines that had it that you went to jail for God knows how long, 20 years to life for an ounce of crack. They repealed those drug laws and stiffened the penalties on firearms to what I told you about. And at the end of the day, what's happening in New York? Murders are going down, gun seizures are going down, and incarceration rates are going down at the same time. We can do it. We can definitely get this done, but we have to have a conversation about it. And the African American community is very concerned about mass incarceration, and rightfully so. I've said from the beginning that the war on drugs has been a dismal failure in this country. It's not doing what we want it to do. So let's change it. We have a long way to go. I can't believe that I've actually been here for 3.5 years. I can't believe that we're achieving things at the level that we're doing it. But the men and women of this department are just unbelievable. They're working hard, they're getting it done, and they need your support every single day. Whenever people come up to me, and they do it all the time, they say, thank you for what you're doing, we respect what you're doing. I tell them the same thing. Do me a favor and tell our police officers that they're the ones who need to hear it day in and day out. I'll stop now. I'm sure you're going to have questions. This is always my favorite part. Please put your real name on the card because I know how this goes. Thank you very much.
Showing great courage, I could say that the superintendent did take a tad longer than normal, but I wasn't brave enough to do anything about it. So we'll only have time for 1 or 2 questions.
That was the goal.
I figured that. Also, just in case Tom Selleck retires. Had to throw that in.
Just put on a towel, Paul. I'll be happy.
Yeah. Just. Okay, well, let's see. Not that one. Not that one. Here's one that's typed. You got to go with this. Jane Johnson, where are you? Well,
See what I'm saying? Jane Doe.
skip her. Peter Benzinger, raise your hand. There he is. All right, Peter, old pal. Peter, you've got a lot on this one. Former VP of the City Club, that's true. Okay, Chicago has too many gangs and guns. New York City, Boston, and Philadelphia have a gun court. Chicago and Cook County needs one. Faster, more certain justice. Your opinion?
I was actually involved in the implementation of gun courts in New York City. We created one in Brooklyn, first of all. And, you know, I always hate treading on these waters because I don't like to be critical of other components of criminal justice. But, you know, if I'm a judge and I've got a murder case, a rape case, and a gun case, I'm going to dispose of that gun case so I can concentrate on those more significant crimes. And we found that when we funneled all the gun cases into one courtroom, the mean jail time went from 0 to 365 days, which was the mandatory minimum at the time. So it worked very well there. However, eventually New York got rid of their gun courts because there were other things that became obstructionists to it. And I'm not sure what it was. It happened after I left. But certainly in the beginning, our gun courts were incredibly effective, and that's why we put them in the Bronx and other places throughout New York City. So I endorse it. I endorsed it then. I endorse it now. I'm not positive why they repealed them eventually. I think it was very costly.
Okay, one last question for the guys back there. This is the one that you'll probably record, those chaps. John Frigo, who's not a member of the City Club, but you should be, John. Where are you? Raise your hand. All right,
Get a check.
This is a mulligan. Here we go. Since both the National Guard and Army Reserve are paid to train all year long, have you thought of using them under police control to reduce crime?
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, how about a big round of applause? Oh, you got to give.